My car wasn't in the garage when I got home. My daughter-in-law stepped out, all smiles. "Mother-in-law, we're going to sell your car. You don't even use it anymore." I looked at her and replied, "Calm down. That's wonderful. Now there will be room when I move it out of my house." She never imagined that smile would freeze so quickly. Before you continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. We love to know how far our stories are going. I had been gone for 3 days. 3 days visiting my sister, Dorothy Miller, in Tucson, Arizona, trying to breathe air that didn't smell of unspoken tensions, of that constant feeling of being a foreigner in my own home. When the bus dropped me off at the corner of my Maplewood subdivision, San Antonio, I felt that strange relief that comes from returning to the place where you were born, where you raised your children, where your husband kissed you for the last time before leaving. I walked the 2 blocks, dragging the rolling suitcase Vincent gave me when I turned 60, because he said a woman like me deserved to travel with dignity. And as I turned onto my street, something in my chest tightened. I didn't know what it was yet, just a hunch, one of those older women's intuitions that always end up being right. The blue gate to my house was ajar. That was already strange. I always locked it. I pushed it open slowly, and that's when I saw him, or rather, when I didn't see him. The garage was empty. The green Mitsuru, my companion of 15 years, the last gift Vincent gave me before cancer took him away, wasn't there. I stood there with the suitcase in my hand, feeling the afternoon sun burning the back of my neck, but unable to move. It was as if someone had erased a piece of my life, because that car wasn't just metal and tires. It was the mornings driving to St. Mary's Parish Church Mass. It was going to the market on Saturdays. It was feeling like I could still move through the world without asking anyone's permission. And then I heard her, that laugh that over the past few months I had learned to recognize as the sound of something bad about to happen. April Sanders came out of the house, drying her hands on a dishcloth. My kitchen, my dishcloth, with that smile she wore when she thought she'd won something. She was wearing a new blouse, one of those that cost as much as I spent at the market in a whole month. Her hair was freshly combed, her nails painted bright red. "Mother-in-law, it's so good you're home," she said to me in that sing-song voice she used when she wanted to sound innocent. "We wanted to let you know, but we forgot in all the hustle and bustle." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, waiting, because I already knew. My whole body already knew. "We sold your car." She said it like someone announcing she'd bought bread. "You don't even use it anymore, mother-in-law. It's just sitting there gathering dust, costing money for registration. George and I needed the money for some things, and that's it. We sold it yesterday." The world stopped. It wasn't dramatic. There was no background music or slow motion. It was worse. It was that silence where everything breaks inside. But on the outside, you're still standing, because that's how we were taught to endure, to swallow, to smile, even if they're tearing your soul to pieces. Before I continue telling you what happened that day, let me ask you something. If this story is touching your heart, give it a like and subscribe to the channel, because what's coming next will show you that even the most silent woman has a limit, and when that limit is crossed, she trembles to the ground. April kept talking about how they got $7,000, which was a good price for such an old car. which they needed to pay off some debts. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was looking through her toward the empty garage, toward the space where every morning I caressed the steering wheel before starting the car and whispered to Vincent, "Another day, my love, another day without you, but with what you left me." That car was the last thing that smelled of him, of his cologne, of his way of adjusting the mirror, of his hands on the wheel when he taught me how to drive at 50 years old, because he said that a woman shouldn't depend on anyone to get through life. And this woman, this intruder, dressed in expensive clothes bought with money she didn't earn, had taken it away from me, without asking, without even having the decency to let me know. I felt something rise in my throat. It wasn't tears. It was something older, more dangerous. It was that fire that we women carry hidden for years, waiting for the exact moment to burst into flame. April stopped talking when she saw my face. Her smile trembled slightly. She realized, perhaps, that she had crossed an invisible line. "Mother-in-law?" she asked, no longer with that sweet voice. "It's okay." I looked her straight in the eyes, that kind of look that only women who have given birth, buried their dead, and survived betrayals can give. That look that doesn't need screaming because it's sharper than any knife. "It's great that you sold the car, April." My voice came out calm, too calm. "That way, there'll be room when I take it out of my house." I saw the smile freeze on her face, her eyes barely opening, processing what she had just heard, how the rags slipped from her hands. "What do you say? What did you hear?" I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. "Now excuse me, I need to rest in my house." I walked past her and the smell of her expensive perfume made me nauseous. I entered my living room, my space, and the first thing I saw was George Moore, my son, my only son, sitting in the armchair his father and I bought when we got married. His eyes were red. He didn't look at me when I entered, and that's when I knew. I knew with that certainty that only a mother's pain can give. He knew. He had let it happen. He had chosen, and he hadn't chosen me. I went up to my room without saying anything else. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, that bed where I slept with Vincent for 32 years, and let the silence envelop me. I didn't cry yet, because crying was accepting defeat, and something told me that this story was just beginning. Something told me they didn't know who they had messed with, because the woman who loved silently, the one who cooked without complaint, the one who smiled even when it hurt, that woman had just died in the empty garage, and the one who remained was ready for war. Do you want to know what happened next? Wait for the next chapter, because what I discovered that night changed everything. To understand how I got to that moment, standing in front of an empty garage, looking at my daughter-in-law as if she were a stranger, I have to take you back 3 years, to the day I opened my door, believing I was being a good mother, unaware that I was signing my own sentence. Barely 4 months had passed since I buried Vincent. 4 months living in a house that suddenly felt the size of an empty stadium. Every room held his voice. Every corner smelled of his absence. I woke up at 5 in the morning, not because I had something to do, but because the bed without him was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. George came to visit me on Sundays, bringing sweetbread from the Sunrise Bakery and Cafe I liked, sitting with me for coffee, asking me how I was, and I lied. I told him I was fine, calm, learning to live on my own, because that's what mothers do. We lie so our children wouldn't bear our pain. That Sunday in October, he arrived different. He had a woman on his arm, April. The first time I saw her, I thought she was pretty. She had that kind of beauty you see in magazines. Fair skin, long shiny hair, a perfect smile. She was wearing a tight dress that showed she took care of herself, that she went to the gym, that she knew how to get attention. She hugged me with such a strong perfume that it made me a little dizzy. "Mother-in-law, it's so nice to finally meet you. George has told me so much about you." She called me mother-in-law from the beginning, as if we were already family, as if with that affectionate little word she could overcome all the steps of trust. "Mom," said George, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a child. Excitement. "We got married 2 weeks ago in a civil ceremony. We wanted to tell you in person." I was left with the coffee cup suspended in the air. Married. My son had gotten married, and I wasn't there. There was no invitation, no wedding dress, no moment when the mother of the groom hugs her son and says, "Be happy, my son, be happy." But I swallowed, smiled, and hugged them. "How lovely. Congratulations to both of you." April laughed with that little bell-like laugh that I would later learn to hate. "It's all so fast, mother-in-law." We met, fell in love, and said, "Why wait? Life is short. You have to live it." She was right about that last part. Life is short. Vincent had shown me that when he left without warning, without giving me time to prepare for a world without him. We sat down to eat. April talked the whole time about her job at a downtown Houston market boutique, about how difficult it was to get an apartment because everything was so expensive, about how much she wanted to start a family with George. She said it all with that energy that young people have, that certainty that the world owes them something. And then she blurted it out. "Mother-in-law, we wanted to ask you a huge favor." She leaned toward me, placing her hand on mine. "Would you let us stay here for just 2 months? We're just looking for something, but with my salary and George's, we can barely scrape together the down payment. If we save 2 months' rent, we'll make it." I looked at George. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on his plate, moving the rice back and forth with his fork. 2 months. 60 days. Company in this house that swallowed me alive every night. My son's voice in the hallway again. Maybe even grandchildren soon. A reason to get up with gusto. "Of course, my son. This is your house. It always has been." April hugged me so tightly she almost knocked me off my seat. "Oh, mother-in-law, you don't know how grateful we are. I promise you won't even notice we're here. We are clean, tidy, and quiet." 2 months, she said. The 2 months turned into 4 when April said the apartment they were going to rent had been given to someone else. "Bad luck, mother-in-law, but another one will appear." The 4 months became 6 when George lost his job at the auto parts factory. "It's temporary, Mom. I'm already sending out resumes. I just need a little more time." The year passed, and I was still waiting for them to tell me, "Mom, we finally found a place. Thanks for everything." But those words never came. What did come was change. At first, it was just small details. April moved the living room furniture because it looks more modern, mother-in-law. She changed the kitchen curtains without asking me. She brought her own dishes and packed mine, the ones my mom gave me when I got married, all the way up to the top of the cabinet I could barely reach. She started cooking. She said she wanted to help me, that I had already worked hard in my life, but the truth is, she didn't want me in my kitchen. She looked at me impatiently when I tried to make coffee in the mornings, as if I were in the way. "Better sit down, mother-in-law. I'll bring the coffee to your room." To my room, as if the rest of the house were no longer mine. Then came the rules. Mother-in-law, would you mind not playing music so loud in the mornings? George works until late and needs to rest. Mother-in-law, it's better not to invite your friends over during the week. We have to focus. Mother-in-law, can you let us know when you're going out? It's so we don't have to worry. Letting them know at my own house. Asking permission to invite the friends who'd been coming to visit me since I was 20. But the worst part wasn't the rules. The worst was George. My son had become a ghost. He left early, he came back late. When I tried to talk to him, April always showed up with something, asking if he needed help with the computer, if they needed to go look at an apartment, if they had an important appointment. One afternoon, I found him alone in the yard, smoking, something he'd never done before. "My son, are you okay?" "Yes, Mom, everything's fine, really. Because I feel like we don't talk like we used to." He was silent for a moment. I saw something in his eyes, something like guilt or fear. I couldn't tell the difference. "It's just been difficult, Mom. The new job doesn't pay that well. April and I are saving up, but it takes time. There's no rush, son." "I'm not rushing them." "I know." He finally looked at me. "Thank you for everything, Mom, really." He hugged me, and in that hug I felt something strange. As if he were saying goodbye. As if an invisible wall had appeared between him and me that grew a little wider each day. That wall had a name. April. 2 full years passed, 24 months, watching my house cease to be mine. How my son looked at me less. How the space where I had raised a family, buried my husband, stored my memories, filled with things I didn't recognize. The neighbors started asking me questions. Ruth Johnson, who had lived next door for 30 years, found me at the market. "Evelyn, what happened to your daughter-in-law? The other time, I asked her about you, and she told me you were resting, as if she were the owner of your house." Mary Jenkins, who sold tacos on the corner, told me more directly. "That girl is going around saying that the house now belongs to both of you, that you're older, and that they're taking care of you. I'm just letting you know, Evelyn, in case you didn't know." Didn't know, or didn't want to know, until one night I heard something that broke me in two. It was almost 11. I couldn't sleep, as usual. I went down to the kitchen for a glass of water and heard them talking in the living room. April and her mother, Cassandra Sanders, who had come to visit her. "I'm telling you, Mom, the old lady is already old. She won't last much longer. When she dies, all this will be George's. And George does what I say." "What if he doesn't die soon?" Cassandra asked with a laugh that chilled my skin. "Well, we convince her to go to a nursing home or something, to sell the house and give us our share. After all, she's alone here. What does she want it for?" They both laughed. I stayed there barefoot on the cold floor with the empty glass in my hand, feeling each word digging into my chest like a rusty nail. The old woman, our part, what does she want it for? That night, I didn't drink any water. I went up to my room, sat on the bed, and for the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to see the whole truth. They weren't guests. They were invaders, and I had opened the door to them all by myself. But I still didn't know how much more I had to discover. I still didn't know that in a forgotten drawer, Vincent had left me the key to escape this nightmare. I would discover that soon, and when I did, everything would change. What do you think Evelyn found in that drawer? What's coming will leave you speechless. There's a huge difference between feeling that something is wrong and seeing it with your own eyes, between suspecting that they're taking your place and witnessing it second by second without being able to do anything, or worse, without daring to do anything. After that night when I heard April call me the old woman, something changed inside me. It wasn't a loud change. It was silent, like those cracks that appear in the walls of an old house. No one notices them until one day the wall collapses. I began to observe. I realized that April had redecorated almost the entire house without me noticing. Or maybe I had, but had chosen not to see, because seeing hurts. Seeing forces you to act. The paintings Vincent and I had bought on our trips were no longer in the living room. In their place were enormous photographs of April and George, one of their civil wedding, another of a trip to the beach I didn't know they had taken, yet another where they posed in front of some elegant restaurant. The embroidered cushions my mom gave me when George was born were gone. Now there were some modern ones, the ones they sell in expensive stores, all gray and black, cold, without history. Even the plants in the hallway, my red geraniums that I had carried with me since I got married, they replaced them with succulents in minimalist pots, as if everything that smelled of me, of my life, of my years, had to be erased. But what hurt me most wasn't the things. It was the way they treated me. One morning I went down to breakfast early. It was 7 o'clock. I had always been an early riser. I liked watching the sunrise with a cup of hot coffee, hearing the birds in the tree in the yard, feeling like the day was just beginning and anything was possible. April was already in the kitchen. She was wearing a silk robe, one of those that cost more than my monthly groceries, and she was preparing a smoothie in the blender, my blender, the one I used to make red sauce on Sundays. "Good morning," I said. She turned around and looked at me with obvious annoyance. "Oh, mother-in-law, so early." She turned off the blender. "I'm going to work out in half an hour and I need to concentrate. Can you have breakfast later? Or if you want, I can make you something and bring it to your room." My room, that phrase again, as if I were a tenant in my own house. "Don't worry," I said in the calmest voice I could. "I just came for coffee." "Better not, mother-in-law. Caffeine isn't good at your age. It'll raise your blood pressure." She took out a small box of herbal tea. "Here, this is healthier." And I, like a fool, drank the tea. I went to my room, closed the door and drank that bitter tea, feeling like each sip was swallowing my pride, my anger, my dignity. Things kept getting worse. My friends, Helen Carter, Elaine Brooks, and Connie Davis, had been coming to visit me for 30 years. Every Thursday we would get together to play cards, drink coffee, and gossip. It was my ritual, my time to feel like myself again. One Thursday, they arrived, as always, and rang the doorbell. I ran to open it, excited to see them, but April came before me. "Yes?" she said with a forced smile. "We came to see Evelyn," said Helen, who has never been intimidated by anyone. "Oh, how sad. My mother-in-law isn't feeling well. She's resting. Better another day." "Yes." And she closed the door. I was standing there in the hallway, perfectly fine, listening to my daughter-in-law lie to my face, watching my friends leave, confused, maybe thinking I didn't want to see them anymore. "Why did you do that?" I asked her when she turned around. "Oh, mother-in-law, it's just, the house is a mess." It made me sad that they saw everything like that. "Besides, you know you need to rest. At your age, so much hustle and bustle isn't good." "Those are my friends, April." "Yes, I know. And that's why I take care of you, mother-in-law. She touched my shoulder as if I were a child. You trust me. I didn't say anything else. I went up to my room, and that afternoon, for the first time in a long time, I cried. I cried out of rage, out of helplessness, out of shame at myself for having allowed myself to be cornered like that. But the worst was yet to come. One afternoon I was in the yard watering the few plants I had left when I heard voices in the living room. April was with someone. I peeked in discreetly. It was Lucy Thompson, the neighbor across the street. One of those women who likes to know about everything and everyone. "And Mrs. Moore?" Lucy asked with that tone of feigned curiosity. "Oh, my poor mother-in-law, she's getting more delicate every day." April lowered her voice, but not so much that I couldn't hear. "Just between you and me, Lucy, she's losing her memory. The other day she forgot where she left her keys and then accused me of hiding them. Imagine, it made my blood run cold." "Seriously?" Lucy's eyes widened. "Yes, George and I are very worried. That's why we don't let her go out alone. You see how dangerous the street is? And she's so distracted. Poor lady." Lucy nodded sympathetically. April continued talking, saying that they were thinking of taking me to the doctor, that maybe I needed special care, that it was a blessing that they were there to look after me. I was 67, not 77. I wasn't senile. I hadn't lost any keys. She made that lie up completely, but Lucy believed it. And if Lucy believed it, the whole neighborhood did too. That's how it works, right? You repeat a lie enough times, and people start to see it as the truth. She was painting me as an incapable old woman, as a burden, as someone who needed saving, when in reality, the only one who needed saving was me from her. That night, at dinner, George came home from work. He was tired. He always came home tired. He sat at the table without saying anything. April served in the meal I had prepared, by the way, but she took the credit. "My son," I tried to talk to him. "Can we talk for a minute?" "Not right now, Mom. I'm very tired." "It's important," April interrupted. "George, love, did you remember to put a deposit for the gas?" "No, I forgot. It's about to run out, and we still have to turn off the lights." "Oh, I don't know what we're going to do." George rubbed his face with his hands. He looked defeated, finished. "We'll see, April. We'll see." I looked at them from my place at the table. At that table where I had celebrated George's birthdays, where I had eaten with Vincent every night for 32 years, where I had cried when my mother died, and where I had laughed when George said his first word. And now, I felt like a stranger, like someone not needed. "I pay for the gas and electricity," I said. "I'm fine. I've always paid for them." April looked at me with that condescending smile. "Yes, mother-in-law, but it's a lot of expense for you alone. Better let us help. You're doing enough by letting us live here. Letting us live here. As if they were doing me a favor. As if this house wasn't mine. As if I were the one who should be grateful for them occupying my space, eating my food, breathing my air." George didn't say anything. He just continued eating with his head down. And that's when I realized something terrible. My son had abandoned me without leaving. He was there in front of me, but his head, his heart, his decisions, all of that no longer included me. April had achieved what she wanted. She had pushed him away from me without him even noticing. Or maybe he did notice, but he didn't care. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed up until 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls of my room closing in on me. I thought about Vincent. about what he would say if he could see me like this. He was always a strong man, a man who wouldn't let him give in, who stood up for what was his, who stood up for me. "Evelyn," he would tell me, "you are stronger than you think. Don't let anyone make you feel small." But I did feel small, invisible, erased. I had reached my lowest point, the place where a woman wonders if it's worth it to keep fighting or if it's better to give up. Let them have everything, become small, disappear. But something, a little voice buried deep down, whispered to me that this couldn't be the end of my story, that there had to be another way out, and there was. It was stuck in a drawer that hadn't been opened for 3 years, in a letter written in the shaky handwriting of a man who loved me until his last breath. I just had to find it. I know the suspense is building. What do you think that letter said? What Evelyn is about to discover will change the whole game. There are nights when insomnia isn't your enemy, it's your ally. It forces you to face what you've been avoiding for days. It confronts you with the decisions you've been putting off. It pushes you toward the dark corners where you've kept the things that hurt too much to look at. That night was one of those. It was 4 a.m. The house was silent. That thick silence that only exists when everyone is asleep, except you. I got out of bed without turning on the light. I didn't want to wake anyone. I didn't want April to come out of her room, which used to be my mom's sewing room, to ask me what I was doing awake, to tell me to take a pill, to treat me like I was a child. I walked barefoot to the closet, that closet that I hadn't thoroughly checked in years, because every time I opened it, it smelled of Vincent, his cologne, his clothes, everything he was and would never do again. In the back, behind the boxes of old shoes and the winter blankets, was the wooden box, the one that Vincent had made himself in the backyard workshop when we were still 20. I rubbed it with my fingers. It was dusty, forgotten. I took it out, carefully. It weighed more than I remembered. I sat on the floor with the box on my legs and took a deep breath. I knew there were things in there that would break me. Photos from when we were young. Letters we wrote to each other when he was working in another city and I was here, pregnant with George. Movie tickets. Napkins from restaurants where we celebrated anniversaries. A whole life stored in a piece of wood. I opened the lid slowly, and there was everything, like an avalanche of memories that hit me in the chest. I saw our wedding photo, blurred by time. I saw the first lock of George's hair tucked into a yellowed envelope. I saw the birthday cards I had given Vincent every year, with my cheesy messages written in blue pen. But then, at the bottom of the drawer, I saw something I didn't remember putting there. A thick white envelope sealed with cinnamon tape. On the front, in Vincent's shaky handwriting, that handwriting that became difficult for him in his final months due to chemotherapy, it said to Evelyn, "Open this only if someone ever tries to take away what we built together." My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside were several folded documents and a handwritten letter. I turned on the nightstand lamp, put on my glasses, and began to read. "My dear Evelyn, if you're reading this, it's because something went wrong, because someone, and I have my suspicions about who it might be, is trying to take advantage of you. Forgive me for not telling you sooner. I didn't want to worry you when I was sick. I didn't want you to spend my last days thinking about papers and property instead of being with me. But I need you to know something. I need you to have the tools to defend yourself when I'm gone. 5 years ago, when the home improvement business was at its peak, I bought 2 more properties in addition to our house. I did it with our future in mind, so that we would have something secure in case I was ever lost. They are registered only in your name, Evelyn, only in your name. No one else can claim them. I also bought a small apartment in the Sunset Apartments, Austin neighborhoods. I rented it to a family I trust. The money from that rent goes directly into a Wells Fargo Broadway branch bank account I opened for you. The number is on the attached documents. $650 comes in every month. It's not much, but it's yours. It's your freedom. George doesn't know about this. Forgive me for keeping it from him, but I saw something in him that worried me. I saw that sometimes he's weak, that he's easily swayed by whoever shouts the loudest, or whoever promises him things. And I was afraid that if he knew about these properties, someone, his wife, a friend, whoever, would convince him to take them away from you. This is yours, Evelyn, only yours. Don't let anyone make you feel worthless. Don't let them convince you that you're a burden. You are the strongest woman I've ever known, the one who raised our son alone while I traveled, the one who took care of my mom when she was sick, the one who held my hand in the hospital when I was afraid of dying. You are a warrior, my love, and warriors don't give up. If you need help, find Robert, Bob, Miller. He is my lifelong lawyer. He has copies of everything. Trust him like you trusted me. Forgive me for leaving you. Forgive me for not being able to be there to defend you. But I leave you this, these properties, this money, this letter. I leave you, my love, and no one can take that away from you. Always yours, Vincent. Tears fell onto the paper. They stained the ink. But it didn't matter anymore, because those words were already engraved in my heart. Vincent knew it. Somehow, he knew it. He knew someone would come, maybe not specifically April, but someone to try to take what was mine and had left me a shield. I took out the documents. They were legal and sealed deeds. Property 1. A small house in South Dallas, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, rented to the Parker family, who paid $400 a month. Those payments went into the same bank account Vincent mentioned. Property 2. A commercial space in downtown Houston Market rented to the Bennett family, who sold herbs and remedies, $300 a month. The third one. The apartment in Sunset Apartments, Austin, the one that generated the $650 a month. I quickly did the math in my head. Between the 3 properties, $1,350 were coming in each month, almost $1,400 I didn't know I had. I looked for the paper with the account number. It was there, Wells Fargo, Broadway branch. I dressed quietly. I put on a sweater. I grabbed my bag and went downstairs quietly. I left the house just as dawn broke. The sky had that pale orange color that heralds a new day. I walked the 4 blocks to the ATM on the corner. I inserted the card that came with the documents. I entered the PIN that Vincent had left written down, and there on the ATM's bright green screen the balance appeared. $25,000. Almost $26,000 that had been there for 3 years, growing month by month, waiting for me. I had to hold on to the ATM wall. My legs were shaking. It wasn't just the money, it was what it meant. It meant I wasn't alone. It meant I had options. It meant I didn't need to endure another day. I returned home as the sun was already rising. April was in the kitchen, preparing her usual smoothie. "Good morning, mother-in-law. Did you run errands so early?" "Yes," I said with a smile. "I went to get something I'd forgotten." She looked at me strangely. Maybe she noticed something different in my voice, something that wasn't there before. I went up to my room, put the documents in a safe place, and took out my old cell phone, the one I hardly ever used because April said that at my age I didn't need that much, and I looked up the number Vincent had left. Robert, Bob, Miller, attorney. I dialed. The phone rang 3 times. Attorney Miller, good morning. This is Evelyn Moore, Vincent Moore's widow. There was a silence, then a warm voice. Mrs. Moore, you're finally calling me. Mr. Vincent made me promise I'd help you if you ever needed anything. What can I do for you? I took a deep breath. I need you to help me defend what's mine, counselor, because they want to take it away from me, and I'm not going to let them. Come to my Robert Miller Law Office, downtown San Antonio office, tomorrow at 10, and bring the documents your husband left you. We'll put this all in order. I hung up, and for the first time in 3 years I smiled truly. April thought I was weak. She thought she could trample me until I became nothing. George thought that I would endure anything so as not to lose him, but neither of them knew what I had just discovered. That Vincent, even from beyond the grave, was still watching over me, that I had more power than they ever imagined, and that the war was just about to begin. That morning I had a peaceful breakfast. April served me my usual herbal tea. I drank it without complaint. I smiled. I agreed with everything she said, because the best battles are won in silence, when the enemy believes they've already won. But before Evelyn could act, something worse was about to happen, something that would break her completely and force her to make the most difficult decision of her life. There are moments in life that mark you forever, moments where a line is crossed and there's no turning back, where the pain is so deep that it changes something fundamental within you. This was one of those moments. 2 weeks had passed since I found Vincent's letter. 2 weeks in which I had been gathering my strength, organizing papers, preparing for what was coming. Miller had explained everything to me. The property was mine. The house was mine. I could ask them to leave whenever I wanted, but I still had hope. That foolish hope that mothers have, the one that tells you that, maybe, just maybe, if you talk to your son with an open heart, he'll understand, he'll react, he'll go back to being the child who hugged you and said, "I love you, Mom." Without anyone asking, I decided to try one last time. One Sunday afternoon, when George was home, I asked him to sit down and talk, the 3 of us as a family. We need to discuss something important, I told them as I cleared the plates of food. It's about the situation at home. I saw April and George exchange a look. That look couples share when they know something you don't, when they've already talked about you behind your back and made decisions about your life without asking you. "Of course, Mom," said George, "but better tomorrow, right? Today my in-laws and April's family are coming over. They wanted to get to know you better." My heart sank. "What do you mean, they're coming?" "Yes, mother-in-law." April smiled with that smile that was already making my nerves on edge. "I told my family to come so we could all talk together, you know? So we could get to know each other better. They're in the living room. They hadn't asked me. They hadn't told me. They just invited people to my house without my permission." I swallowed, took a deep breath, and went out to the living room. Everyone was there. Edward Sanders, April's father, a heavy man with a thick mustache, a polo shirt stretched over his stomach, and the attitude of someone who believes his opinion is worth more than everyone else's. He was sitting in Vincent's favorite chair, the one he used to watch the news, his legs spread as if he owned the place. Cassandra Sanders, April's mother, was thin, with dyed blonde hair and long, purple-polished nails. She had that face of someone who is always judging, who sees everything that is wrong, but never what is right. She looked me up and down when I walked in. as if measuring the value of my clothes, my hairstyle, my existence. Eric Sanders, April's younger brother, a 23-year-old who never put his cell phone down even to breathe, didn't even say hello when I walked by. And Veronica Hayes, April's aunt, a woman in her 50s with too much makeup and too many bracelets that jingled every time she moved her hands. She was carrying a brand-name bag, one of those knockoffs they sell in the city, and she had served me cookies for dinner on a plate as if she were at home. "Good afternoon," I said, trying to sound friendly. "Oh, mother-in-law, it's so nice you're coming down." April pulled me by the arm and sat me down in a chair. "Look, they're my family. I've already told them a lot about you." Edward Sanders extended his hand. I shook it. "A pleasure, Mrs. Moore. April told us you're very good people. Thank you for welcoming our little girl into your home." "Thank you for welcoming us," as if April were a temporary guest, as if she hadn't been taking over everything for 3 years. Cassandra just nodded. She didn't smile. Sit down," Veronica Hayes said, pointing to my own chair. "We want to talk to you." I sat down. I felt like all eyes were on me, as if I were the one arriving for a visit, the one who had to behave well to make a good impression. George sat next to April. She took his hand. He didn't look at me. "Well, Mrs. Moore," Edward Sanders began in a loud voice, as if he were in a business meeting. "We want to talk to you about the future of this family." "The future?" I asked. "Yes, you see, our April and your son George have been here for a while, and well, it's time we had a serious conversation about how we're going to organize ourselves." I didn't understand where all this was going. I looked at George. He still wasn't looking at me. April cleared her throat. "Mother-in-law, the thing is that George and I have been living here for 3 years and, well, we want to formalize things." "Formalize?" "Yes, we want you to put the house in everyone's name, in the family's name." She smiled as if she were offering me a favor. "That way, if something ever happens to you, everything will be settled, no legal problems or anything like that." My heart stopped. "On behalf of everyone?" "Yes, mother-in-law. It's only fair, isn't it? After all, this house belongs to the family, and we are your family." Cassandra intervened. "Look, Mrs. Moore, at your age, it's no longer good for you to bear so much responsibility. The taxes, the maintenance, all that. Better let us help you. We'll take care of it, and you can live peacefully." "I live peacefully," I said in a trembling voice. "This is my house. My husband and I have been paying for it for 30 years. Edward Sanders laughed. He laughed loudly. "Oh, Mrs. Moore, don't act like that. No one is taking anything away from you. We just want you to be practical." He leaned toward me. "Look, be honest. What are you going to do alone in this big house? You're old now. You can't handle all this." "I can handle it perfectly," I replied, feeling anger beginning to rise in my throat. Veronica Hayes let out a nervous giggle. "Oh, don't be offended, Mrs. Moore, but it's the truth. At your age, it would be best if you went somewhere more appropriate." "Appropriate?" "Yes, a nursing home or a smaller house. There are some very nice ones in Santa Barbara, California. There you could be at ease without worries, and this house would stay for the kids who are young and need it most." There was a silence. I looked at George. "Please, my son," I thought, "say something, defend me. Tell them they're crazy. Tell them this is your mother's house and that no one has the right to tell her to leave." But George just stared at the floor, his fists clenched, his jaw tense, but silent, cowardly silent. "I'm not going anywhere," I said in a firm voice. This house is mine, and I'm not going to put it in anyone's name. Edward Sanders sighed as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Mrs. Moore, don't be so foolish. Be grateful. My daughter is taking care of you, cooking for you, cleaning for you, looking out for you. The least you can do is cooperate. I haven't asked you to do any of that, I replied, feeling tears welling up, but I wouldn't let them fall. This is my house, and I decide who lives here. Cassandra stood up from the couch. Well then, tell them to leave, she challenged me. If the house is so yours, chase them away and see if they dare leave their son on the street. That was the trap, the oldest manipulation in the world, using my son as an emotional hostage. Mom, George finally spoke. His voice sounded tired, defeated. Maybe we should think about, selling the house, splitting the money. We're all starting over. Something inside me broke, something that has no name, something that once broken can't be fixed the same. Sell the house, I repeated. The house where you were born, the house where your father died. Do you want to sell that house? It's too much for you alone, Mom, and we need the money. We could buy something smaller altogether, or you could rent an apartment and live peacefully. April shook his hand. She smiled. Edward Sanders stood up. That's the sensible thing to do. They sell this house. Give Mrs. Moore her share, let's say about $50,000, which is generous. And with the rest, the kids buy something. Everyone wins. $50,000 for a house that was worth almost $250,000 in a good area. They wanted to rob me right before my eyes, with smiles and kind words. They wanted to strip me of the only thing I had left. I stood up, shaking. I want you all to leave, I said. What do you mean? Cassandra asked. Let everyone leave now. Edward Sanders laughed. Mrs. Moore, calm down. Leave my house, I shouted. The silence was brutal. No one moved. Everyone looked at me as if I had gone crazy, as if I were the unreasonable one, the bad guy in the story. George stood up and took my arm. Mom, calm down. Sit down. I yanked him away. Don't tell me to calm down. Not after this. I left the living room, went up the stairs, entered my bedroom, locked the door, and there, alone, I broke down. I cried like I hadn't cried since I buried Vincent. I cried from rage, from humiliation, from pain. I cried because my son, my only son, had betrayed me, because he had chosen money over me, because he had let that family of vipers treat me like garbage in my own house. I heard them leave, how they closed the door, how April said to George, "You'll see what will happen. She's just angry." I stayed there in my bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like something inside me was dying, and something else, something cold, something hard, was being born in its place. There was no turning back, no forgiveness possible. Now came the war, and I didn't plan on losing it. What Evelyn did after that night would change everything, because when a woman decides she has nothing left to lose, she becomes invincible. There are two kinds of women in this world: those who cry and stay there waiting for someone to rescue them, and those who wipe away their tears and stand up and rescue their lives themselves. That night I decided which of the two I belonged to. I stayed awake until the sun came up, not because of insomnia, but because my brain wouldn't stop working, calculating, planning. Every humiliation I had suffered, every poisoned word, every look of contempt, everything became fuel. Vincent always told me, "Evelyn, you have something many don't have, patience. And patience, well used, is the most powerful weapon." He was right. At 6 a.m. I got up, showered, put on my blue dress, the one I wore for important occasions, and put on my makeup. Not much, just enough to look like a woman who knows her worth. I went downstairs to have breakfast. April was already in the kitchen, as always. She looked at me, surprised. "Good morning, mother-in-law. Have you gotten over your anger from yesterday?" "Good morning, April," I replied with a gentle smile. "Yes, excuse me. I think I reacted badly. I was tired." She blinked. "I hadn't expected that." "Oh, don't worry. We all have our days. The important thing is that we talk it over calmly, right? This house thing is for the good of everyone." "You're right," I said without changing my expression. "Let's talk it over properly. Give me a few days to think it over." Her face lit up. She thought she'd won. "Of course, mother-in-law. Take your time. But you'll see, it's for the best." I ate breakfast calmly. Tortillas with beans, black coffee, as usual. April looked at me out of the corner of her eye, still suspicious, but I remained calm. When George came downstairs, I said good morning as if nothing had happened. He looked at me confused. "Mom, about yesterday. Don't worry, son. It's over now. We'll fix everything." I saw the relief in his eyes. The poor idiot thought I had given up, that I had finally accepted my fate as a disposable old woman. As soon as they left, George for work, April, I don't know where, I sprang into action. I took out my cell phone and called Attorney Miller. "Mr. Miller, I need to see you today. It's urgent." "Did something happen, Mrs. Moore?" "Yes, but I'll tell you in person." At 11 a.m., I was sitting in his Robert Miller Law Office, downtown San Antonio office, a small but tidy place, with bookshelves full of legal codes and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Attorney Miller was a man in his 60s, gray-haired, with thick glasses and a serious but kind expression. I told him everything, every detail, from the day April and George arrived to the humiliation of the day before. I didn't leave anything out. The lawyer listened without interrupting, just taking notes in his yellow notebook. When I finished, he took off his glasses and wiped them with a tissue. "Mrs. Moore, let me be direct. Legally, this is your house. It's solely in your name. You can evict them whenever you want. It's that easy? In theory, yes. But with family, it's complicated. If they refuse to leave, we'd have to go legally, an eviction trial. It takes time and is painful." "How long?" "Between 4 and 6 months. Maybe more if they put up obstacles." I shook my head. "I don't have 6 months, counselor. I need them to leave now, before they do something worse." "Like what?" "Like convincing George to put me in a nursing home, or declare me incompetent." "April is capable of anything." The counselor nodded. "Then we need evidence. Document everything. Recordings, messages, witnesses, anything that proves they're manipulating or threatening you." I took out my cell phone. "Does this help?" In the last few days, I'd started recording conversations without them knowing. I'd leave the phone in my bag with the recorder on and capture everything. April talking to her mother about convincing the old lady. George saying, "No way, we have to put up with her a little longer." Every poisonous word was saved. The lawyer heard some fragments. His expression hardened. "This is gold, Mrs. Moore. With this, we can prove there's manipulation and psychological abuse. So what do? First, open a new bank account. Transfer the rent money there so they don't have access to anything. It's done. Good. Second, take an inventory of everything in the house. Furniture, documents, valuables. Take photos. If things go missing, we'll have proof. I'll do it today. Third, find a temporary place to stay in case you need to leave the house quickly. I have my sister in Tucson, Arizona. Perfect. And fourth, continue behaving normally so they don't suspect anything. Keep recording. Keep documenting. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be. And then the lawyer smiled. A small, but just smile. Then, Mrs. Moore, we'll strike when they least expect it. We'll get them out of the house legally, with evidence, without them being able to claim anything. I left that office with a plan, a clear objective. For the first time in years, I felt I was back in control. The next few days were pure acting. I smiled. I cooked. I chatted with April as if nothing had happened. I even asked her about her family, about her plans, feigning interest. She ate up my act with a spoon. She thought I'd tamed myself. Meanwhile, I documented everything. I photographed every room in the house, counted the furniture, reviewed the deeds, the receipts, everything. I also visited my niece, Lucy Thompson, an accountant by profession, and asked her to help me organize the finances. Lucy was a smart woman in her 40s, divorced, and outspoken. "Aunt, why didn't you tell me before that you were going through this?" "Because I was ashamed, my daughter. Ashamed that my own son would do this to me." Lucy hugged me. "Aunt, listen carefully. George has always been weak. Ever since he was little, he lets himself be bossed around. But not you. You're the tough one, and we're going to get that viper out of your house." With his help, I organized everything. I knew exactly how much money I had. I knew I could live peacefully on the property rents, that I didn't need a single dime from George or anyone else. I also did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Jack Turner, a thin, quiet man, one of those who goes unnoticed. I paid her $400 to follow April for a week. What she discovered made my blood run cold. April didn't work in any boutique. That was a lie. What she did was spend the money George was working his butt off earning. She went to spas, beauty salons, and expensive restaurants with her friends. She took photos for Instagram showing off a life that wasn't hers. But the worst part was this. Jack recorded her talking to her friend in a cafe, and in that conversation, April said something that devastated me. "The old lady is almost down. George is already convinced to sell. I told him that with that money we'd buy an apartment and that his mom would have enough to go to a nursing home. He believed me. As soon as we sell, we'll keep everything, and he'll have to put up with her for 3 years. But it was worth it." She was laughing. She was laughing while planning to destroy me. When I heard that recording in Attorney Miller's office, I didn't cry. I had no more tears, only ice. "Is this enough?" I asked. "More than enough. With this, we can prove fraud, manipulation, and conspiracy to dispossess property. When do we act?" "Soon, Mrs. Moore. Very soon. But I need you to do something more. Gather everyone, George, April, her family, in your house. Like a family meeting, so they think you're going to sign papers or agree to the sale. And then we confront them with evidence, with witnesses, with no way out. I felt a knot in my stomach. Are you sure? Completely. It's the only way they can't twist the story later, so it's clear who is who. I nodded. For 2 more weeks, I continued my act. I even told April that I was considering selling, that I wanted to talk to everyone so we could come to an agreement. She was happy. She was practically jumping up and down. She told her family. They organized everything. They even brought in a real estate contact, an acquaintance of Edward Sanders, to appraise the house. Poor fools. They didn't know that I already had my own team, my own plan, my own trap ready to spring. And when they fell, when they saw their whole castle of lies crumble, I would be there, standing firm, with my head held high. Because this war was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about regaining my dignity. The night of the confrontation was about to arrive, and what would happen in that room would change everyone's lives forever. There are moments in life when everything converges to a single point, where all the pieces you silently moved finally fit together, where the chessboard shows its true shape and checkmate is just a move away. That day had arrived. It was Saturday, 3 p.m. The sun streamed through my living room windows, illuminating every corner. I had cleaned everything that morning. I wanted the house to be spotless, not for them, but because what was about to happen deserved a worthy stage. April had organized everything, of course. She invited her parents, her brother Eric Sanders, and Aunt Veronica Hayes. She even brought a certain Oscar Reynolds, the supposed property appraiser who was a friend of Edward Sanders, with his briefcase and calculator, ready to put on a show. I had also invited my family. My sister Dorothy Miller came from Tucson, Arizona. She arrived early, hugged me tightly, and whispered in my ear, "Today justice is served, Evelyn. Today you get what's yours back." Attorney Miller was also there, sitting discreetly in a dining room chair with his worn leather briefcase. April had seen him come in and asked me who he was. "A family friend," I told her with a smile. "I want him to be there so everything is clear." She didn't suspect a thing. She was too excited counting the money she thought she was going to make. At 3:15, everyone was already sitting in my living room. Edward Sanders in the main chair, with his stomach peeking out from under his shirt. Cassandra next to him, with that sour face she never got rid of. Eric, glued to his cell phone. Veronica Hayes eating my cookies without asking permission. And Oscar Reynolds, the fake appraiser, arranging papers on the coffee table. George was silent, sitting next to April, with sweaty hands and a blank stare. Maybe deep down he knew that something wasn't right. Maybe her conscience was screaming at her that this was wrong, but he was too cowardly to listen. April took my arm when I walked in. "Mother-in-law, how great that you're here. Look, here's Mr. Reynolds. He's going to explain how much the house is worth and how we can sell it quickly. Isn't that exciting?" "Very exciting," I said without any emotion. I sat down in the chair next to Attorney Miller. Dorothy stood behind me with her hands on my shoulders. Her silent support gave me strength. Oscar Reynolds cleared his throat. "Well then, Mrs. Moore, it's a pleasure to meet you." He took out some papers. "I've done a preliminary appraisal of the property, based on the property's characteristics, the area, and its state of repair. I estimate that the market value of this house is approximately $200,000. Everyone smiled, as if I had just announced they had won the lottery. "Now," continued Oscar, "the ideal would be to sell quickly, I have several interested clients. We could close the deal in 2 weeks and divide the money as the family agrees." Edward Sanders rubbed his hands together. "Mrs. Moore, that's a lot of money. More than enough for everyone." "Of course," added Cassandra. "You keep your share. You buy something comfortable and small, and the kids can start their lives." April shook George's hand. He still didn't look at me. "And how much would my share be?" I asked in a calm voice. Oscar consulted his calculator. "Well, considering that you're the original owner, but that your son and daughter-in-law have lived here and contributed to the upkeep, the fair thing would be to divide the amount equally. Let's say $50,000 for you and the rest for the marriage." "You haven't contributed anything," I interrupted. "I pay the electricity, I pay the water, I pay the property tax. I pay everything." There was an awkward silence. April laughed nervously. "Oh, mother-in-law, don't be like that. We help you with other things, right, love?" George nodded lamely. Oscar cleared his throat. "Well, anyway, the fair thing would be to divide the amount equally. Let's say $50,000 for you and the rest for the marriage." $50,000 from my own house, the house I paid for with 30 years of sweat. I kept watching Oscar Reynolds, then Edward Sanders, then April. "What if I don't want to sell?" April's smile trembled. "What do you mean you don't want to sell?" But we'd already agreed. "I never agreed to anything, April. You made the decision for me." Edward Sanders stood up from the chair. "Mrs. Moore, don't be difficult. We've already talked about this. It's the best for everyone." "The best for everyone," I repeated, "or the best for you." Cassandra snorted. I knew she was going to regret it. It always happens with old people. They get stubborn. Something in me clicked. The trigger was pulled. "Mr. Miller," I said, without taking my eye off April, "I think it's time." The lawyer stood up and took several documents out of his briefcase. "Who is this man?" April asked suspiciously. "I'm Robert Miller, a lawyer. I represent the legal interests of Mrs. Evelyn Moore." "Lawyer? Why do you need a lawyer?" Edward Sanders frowned. "To protect what's yours," Attorney Miller replied in a firm voice. "Gentlemen, I regret to inform you that this meeting is not what you think." April stood up abruptly. "What's going on here?" "What's going on," I said, standing up as well, "is that the drama is over." I took a portable speaker out of my bag, one of those little ones I had bought specifically for this moment. I connected it to my cell phone. "What are you doing, mother-in-law?" "Show them who you really are, April." And I pressed play. April's voice filled the room, clear, distinct, without a doubt. "The old lady is almost down. George is already convinced to sell. I told him that with that money we can buy an apartment and that his mom would have enough to go to a nursing home. He believed me. As soon as we sell, we'll keep everything, and he can go to the..." The silence was deathly. Edward Sanders turned pale. Cassandra opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Eric looked up from his cell phone for the first time that afternoon. April took a step back. "That's it. That's edited." "I didn't say that edited," I asked. "Do you want me to play more?" I played another recording. This time it was April talking to her mother. "I'm telling you, Mom, the old lady is old now. She won't last much longer. When she dies, all this will be left for George, and George does what I say." Cassandra's laughter sounded in the background, that laugh that had frozen my blood that night. Cassandra stood up. "Evelyn, not me. I didn't..." "Shut up," I said with a coldness I didn't even recognize. "I had to listen to you make fun of me in my own house. Now it's your turn to listen." I played a third recording of April telling George, "Your mom is old now, my love. She won't even notice about the car. She doesn't even use it anymore. It's money we need more." George got up from the couch. His face was red. I didn't know if it was from embarrassment or anger. "Mom, you knew," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. "You knew they were going to sell my car, and you let it happen." "It wasn't like that." "Then how did it happen?" George didn't know how to respond. Miller spoke. "Gentlemen, I have here documented evidence of psychological manipulation, conspiracy to commit property theft, and fraud. Mrs. Moore has every legal right to evict you from this property. And believe me, we will." April began to cry, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of rage, of anger, because her plan had failed. "You set us up," she shouted, pointing at me. "You recorded us without permission. That's illegal." Attorney Miller explained, "Recording conversations in which one is a party is completely legal. And all these recordings were made in the presence of Mrs. Moore." Edward Sanders approached me. For a moment I thought he was going to yell at me, but his voice came out small and embarrassed. "Evelyn, I didn't know my daughter." "Of course you knew," I interrupted him. "You were here the day they told me to go to a nursing home. You laughed with me. You thought I was a silly old woman who they could boss around." He didn't know what to say. He turned around and looked at his daughter, April. "All this is true?" She didn't respond. She was just crying. But they were the tears of a trapped snake. Veronica Hayes got up from the chair, her bracelets clacking. "Well, I'd better go. I have nothing to do with this here." "Sit down," I ordered, "because you are also here suggesting that I go to a nursing home. You're all equally guilty." Oscar Reynolds, the appraiser, gathered his papers nervously. "I'd better—" "You're not leaving either," said Attorney Miller. "Passing yourself off as a professional appraiser without being one is fraud. I have witnesses to your actions." The man paled. I looked at George. His eyes were watery, his hands trembling. "Mom, forgive me. I didn't mean to." "You don't want my forgiveness, George. Do you want me to take the blame away from you?" I approached him. "You had 1,000 opportunities to defend me. 1,000 opportunities to tell your wife to stop. 1,000 opportunities to be the son I raised. I love you, Mom. No, you need me." Which isn't the same thing. I turned around and addressed everyone. "You have 15 days to vacate my house. And I say my house because it's in my name, solely in my name. You can check the deeds if you want." Attorney Miller laid the deeds on the table. "Here it is. Exclusive property of Evelyn Moore, Vincent Moore's widow. No co-owners, no liens." April slumped in the chair. Edward Sanders had his head in his hands. Cassandra was crying angrily. Eric was still in shock. 15 days, I repeated, "and if you don't leave, the lawyer will proceed legally. And believe me, with all the evidence I have, you won't win." Dorothy hugged me from behind. Her support kept me standing. "And another thing," I added, looking at April. "I know you don't work. I know you spend my son's salary on spas and restaurants. I know you've been living a lie, and now everyone knows it." April raised her face. Her eyes were full of hatred. "And what about you, madam? You think you're so perfect. You're a spiteful, bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son happy. April, shut up, Edward Sanders said in a tired voice. I won't shut up. She stood up and pointed at me. You don't understand. George and I needed that money. We have debts, we have plans. We can't continue living like this. So work, I said coldly, like decent people do. She lunged at me. Dorothy intervened, Attorney Miller too. Mrs. Sanders, I recommend you control yourself, warned the lawyer. Any physical aggression will be documented and used against you. George pulled April by the arm. Enough, let's go. Let's go. Where? She yelled. We have nowhere to go. That isn't my problem anymore, I said. They should have thought of that before. One by one they left. Edward Sanders without looking at me, Cassandra muttering curses. Veronica Hayes with her head down, Eric running toward the car, Oscar Reynolds almost tripping on his way out. April stopped at the door. He looked at me with a hatred that could have burned down the house. This isn't going to stay like this. Yes, it is going to stay like this, I replied. And if you try anything, I have more evidence than you can imagine. He left, slamming the door. George stood there in the middle of the living room like a lost child. Mom, the 15 days start today, I told him. There's no turning back, George. And if I talk to her, if we do things right, it was too late for that 3 years ago. His eyes filled with tears. Then I lost my mom. No, you chose to lose me. He left the house. I heard April's car start and them drive away down the street. When silence returned, I slumped into the couch. Dorothy sat next to me. Miller put away his documents. You did very well, Mrs. Moore, she said respectfully. I know it wasn't easy. No, I admitted, but it was necessary. Dorothy hugged me. Now your real life begins, sister. I looked around my living room, my house, my space. Soon it would be mine alone again, and although my chest ached, although I felt like something had been broken forever between George and me, for the first time in years I felt free. But the story wouldn't end there. The following days would bring surprises that Evelyn never imagined. The days after the confrontation were strange, like living in a haunted house where the ghosts haven't completely left, but you know they have no power over you. George and April didn't leave immediately. Legally, they had their 15 days, but living together was unbearable. April stopped pretending. There was no more mother-in-law with a sweet voice. There were no more fake smiles. Now she saw me with the pure hatred of someone who had been robbed of a prize she thought she'd earned. She locked herself in her room most of the day. She screamed on the phone to her mom and her friends, crying and playing the victim. They kicked me out of the house. The old lady set a trap for us after everything we did for her. How easy it is to change the story when it suits you, right? George was different. He moved around the house like a zombie. He left for work early. He came back late. He avoided my gaze. He tried to talk to me twice. The first time was in the kitchen one morning. I was making coffee. My coffee was on my stove when he came in. Mom, can we talk? What do you want to talk about, George? He was silent for a moment. He had dark circles under his eyes. He looked older than he was. About everything. How did we get to this? Or if there's any way to fix it. I put the cup in the sink and looked at him straight. Fix what exactly? The fact that they sold my car without my permission, or that they were planning to send me to a nursing home, or that your wife was calling me an old woman while eating my food. I didn't know all that, Mom. You did know, George. Maybe not the details, but you knew that something was wrong and you chose not to see. He rubbed his hands over his face, that gesture he'd made since he was a child when he was overwhelmed. It's because April, she pressured me. She said we needed money, that you were already grown up and you believed her, I interrupted. You believed her instead of defending me. He didn't know how to respond. That's what hurts me the most, my son. Not that you were wrong, but that when you had to choose between her and me, you left me alone. His eyes broke. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really sorry. I know, George, but I'm sorry is not bringing back the 3 years I lived feeling like a foreigner in my own home. It's not bringing back my car. It's not bringing back my dignity. I left the kitchen, leaving him there crying. And no, I didn't feel sorry for him, because sometimes pain is the only teacher we have. The second time he tried to talk, it was worse. It was nighttime. I was in my room, reviewing documents with Attorney Miller on the phone, when I heard screaming, loud screaming. George and April were fighting. I went downstairs slowly. I stayed in the hallway, listening. "This is your fault," April shouted. "It's your fault for being so weak. If you had talked to your mom properly, we would have the money by now." "Don't start, April. You were the one who was too clever about the car. Because you never do anything. You just leave your mom, your boss, everyone alone. You're useless." A bang was heard. Something broke. Maybe a plate, maybe a lamp. "Enough," George shouted. "I'm sick of all this. Sick of your tantrums, your whims, your lies." "My lies? You knew everything. You knew we needed that money to pay off the credit cards, but now you're playing innocent." "I never said I agreed to kick my mom out of the house, but you didn't say no either, did you?" Silence. A silence that said it all. "You're a coward, George. You always have been, and you're a—" He didn't finish his sentence. I heard quick footsteps, a door slam. I stood there in the darkness of the hallway, my heart racing, not from fear, but from sadness, because I was watching my son's marriage crumble before my eyes, and the worst part was that I had been the one who pulled the first stone. But I didn't regret it. The next day, April began packing angrily. She threw clothes into suitcases, accidentally broke things, and muttered curses every time she walked by. I didn't say anything to her. I just watched, mentally documenting everything she took in case she tried to steal something that wasn't hers. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. It was Cassandra Sanders, April's mother. She came alone. "Mrs. Moore, may I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, but something in her expression, tired, defeated, made me open the door. We entered the living room. I offered her coffee. She accepted. We sat in awkward silence. She stirred the coffee with her spoon without drinking. Finally, she spoke. "I came to apologize. I didn't expect that. I shouldn't have said anything about the nursing home. I shouldn't have treated you like that. You didn't deserve that." "Why did you do it?" I asked bluntly. Cassandra sighed. "Because my daughter convinced me. She told me that you agreed, that you wanted to sell, that everything was arranged and just needed a little more convincing." "And you believed her?" "Yes, because she's my daughter, and we like to believe that our children aren't capable of certain things." She looked up, but after listening to those recordings, I realized that I don't know my daughter. Or maybe I do know her, and I didn't want to see it. April has always been like that. Cassandra lowered her gaze. Since she was little, she always wanted more than we had. She always compared. Look, Mom, the girl across the street has this. Why can't we have that? We spoiled her, gave her everything we could and more, and created a monster. Tears began to flow, but they were real tears, not like April's. Edward and I are getting divorced, she confessed. This was the final straw. We've been feeling bad for years, and seeing how our daughter behaved made us realize many things I didn't know what to say. Sometimes other people's pain doesn't need words. I'm sorry, Mrs. Moore. I'm truly sorry, and I understand if you don't forgive me, but I needed to tell you. She got up to leave. At the door, she stopped. Take care of your son. George is a good person. Weak, but a good person. My daughter will destroy him if he doesn't leave. And he left. The next few days were a countdown. 13 days. 12. 10. 8. April arranged for them to stay with her parents in that small 2-bedroom apartment that they would now have to share between 4 people. The irony was delicious. George packed silently. He put away his clothes, his shoes, some books. He left many things behind, as if he knew he wouldn't need them again. The night before he left, he went down to the living room. I was watching television. Mom, can I sit down? I nodded. He sat in the chair across from me, the one that belonged to his father. Tomorrow we're leaving. I know it, and I don't know if I'll come back. That hurt me. Although I knew it was likely, hearing it from his mouth was different. That depends on you, George. The door was always open. You were the one who closed it. I know. He rubbed his hands together nervously. I'm thinking about separating from April. I looked up in surprise. Seriously? Yes. These days I've realized many things. How she manipulated me. How my relationship with you changed. His voice cracked. How I've become someone I don't recognize. And why don't you separate now? Because I'm scared, Mom. Scared of being alone. Scared that you're right, and I'm a coward. I got up and sat next to him. I took his hand. My son, being afraid doesn't make you a coward. What makes you a coward is letting fear decide for you. Do you think there's still time to fix this between you and me? I looked into his eyes, those eyes I'd known since he was born, that I'd seen cry when he fell as a child, that I'd seen shine when he graduated, that were now broken. I don't know, George. That will depend on what you do from now on whether you learn from this, or if you make the same mistakes again. I want to learn, Mom. I want to be better. So, start by making your own decisions. Not the ones April tells you, not the ones I tell you, but yours. We hugged, and in that hug I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Small, fragile, but there. The next day, at 9 in the morning, a moving van arrived. April left with her suitcases, without saying goodbye, without looking back, as if I didn't exist. George loaded the last boxes. He stopped at the door. Thank you, Mom, for everything, even though I don't deserve it. Take care, my son. He got into the truck. April was already inside, her arms crossed and her sour face becoming permanent. They drove off. I watched them drive down the street until they turned the corner and disappeared. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway in the most absolute silence I'd experienced in 3 years. And then, for the first time since all this started, I smiled. My house was empty, but it was mine again. And that's where Evelyn's true rebirth would begin. Because sometimes to get your life back, you first have to lose everything. There is a silence that hurts, the silence of loneliness, the silence of abandonment. And there is a silence that heals, the silence of peace, the silence of reclaiming what is yours. That first day alone in my house was of the second kind. I stood in the middle of the room for I don't know how long, just breathing, smelling my space without the cheap April perfume, without the sound of her fake laughter, without the tension of always being on alert, always taking care of myself, always measuring my words so as not to provoke a conflict. I walked through each room slowly, as if scoping out recovered territory. I entered what had been their room. It was a mess. Clothes scattered, drawers open, stains on the wall where posters had been pasted without my permission. It smelled of confinement and pent-up rage. I opened the windows wide, let in the air and light, and began to clean. I didn't hire anyone. I did it myself with my own hands, because I needed to erase every trace of them, every footprint, every toxic memory. I scraped the floor, washed the walls, changed the sheets on all the beds, took out the furniture they'd brought, that cold, modern stuff that never fit with the soul of my house, and left it on the street for whoever wanted to take it. It took me 3 days to clean everything, 3 days in which I didn't answer the phone, I didn't speak to anyone. I just dedicated myself to reclaiming my space. On the 4th day, Dorothy came from Tucson, Arizona. "Oh, sister, the house looks beautiful," she said when she entered, "because it's mine again." She helped me rearrange the furniture. We took the things April had packed away from the closet. My good dishes, Vincent's and my paintings, my mom's embroidered pillows. Little by little, the house returned to what it was, a home, not a battlefield. One afternoon, while we were drinking coffee in the kitchen, Dorothy asked me, "And what are you going to do now, Evelyn?" "What do you mean?" "With your life. You've got your house back, you've taken the weight off your shoulders, but what's next?" I kept thinking. I was 67 years old, healthy, with rent money coming in, a paid-for house, freedom. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's been so long since I've thought about myself, I don't even know what I like anymore." Dorothy smiled. "So it's time for you to find out." And she was right. I started, little by little. First, I invited my friends over again, Helen Carter, Elaine Brooks, and Connie Davis. I explained everything that had happened. They hugged me, supported me, told me what I already knew, that I had done the right thing. Thursdays became sacred again. Cards, coffee, healthy gossip, laughter. Those laughs that come from the soul when you're with people who truly love you. Then I decided to do something I'd been wanting to do for years. I signed up for dance classes. Yes, dance. At the Westside Community Center, they offered social dance classes on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. The first time I went, I was nervous. What am I doing here at my age? I thought. But as soon as the music started, that slow, elegant rhythm, and the teacher showed me the steps, something in me woke up. It was freedom. It was joy. It was feeling my body move without fear of disturbing anyone. I also resumed my routine of going to Sunday Mass at St. Mary's Parish Church, not because I was particularly religious, but because I liked the peace of being there. The Virgin Mary had always accompanied me through difficult times. Now I was going to thank her. But there was something pending, something I needed to close, my car. One Saturday morning, I asked my niece Lucy Thompson to accompany me. We went to the auto repair shop where April and George had sold it, a small place in the East Side Auto Repair San Antonio neighborhood with 3 disassembled cars in the yard and the smell of burnt oil. The owner was a skinny, older man wearing stained overalls and a baseball cap. "Good morning," I said. "I came to ask about a green sedan that was bought a few weeks ago." License plate MXD7483. The gentleman scratched his head. Oh yes, I bought that one for $700 because it's a classic. They sold it to me without my permission. The gentleman got nervous. Look, ma'am, I didn't know anything about that. A young man and his wife came to offer it to me. They told me it was theirs. I paid in good faith. I know, and I don't blame him, but that car has a lot of sentimental value to me. Do you still have it? Yes, it's in the back. I was going to fix it to resell it. Would you sell it back to me? The gentleman looked at me in surprise. Do you want to buy it? Yes. How much are you asking? Well, it cost $7,000 plus the repairs I made, about $500. Let's say that's $7,500 and it's yours. I took out my wallet. I counted the cash I had withdrawn from the bank that same day. Here are your $7,500, and I want the papers in order, please. The man couldn't believe it, but he agreed. Half an hour later, I was sitting back in the driver's seat of the green Mitsuru, my hands on the wheel, smelling that old vinyl scent and the pine air fresheners Vincent always bought. I cried, but this time from happiness. Ready, Aunt? Lucy asked from the passenger seat. Ready. I started the car and drove back home, blasting music, old songs by artists like Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley, the kind that make you feel alive. When I got home and put the car in the garage, that garage April had said there was still room for when I pulled out, I felt like I was closing a circle. I had everything back: my house, my dignity, my car, my life. But then something unexpected happened. 6 months after they left, I received a call. It was George. Mom, can we meet? My heart leapt. I hadn't heard from him in all that time. Not a call, not a text, nothing. Where are you? I asked. At a cafe near your house, the corner cafe. Can you come over? I hesitated for a moment, but something in his voice, something broken, something humble, made me say yes. When I got to the cafe, I saw him sitting at a table in the back, alone, without April. He looked different, thinner, with a few days' growth of beard, wearing simple clothes. He no longer wore those expensive shirts April bought him. I sat across from him. Hello, Mom. Hello, my son. He ordered 2 coffees. We were silent for a moment. Those awkward silences when there's so much to say that you don't know where to start. I separated from April. He said finally, When? 3 months ago. The divorce is already in progress. What happened? He laughed bitterly. Everything. Living with her parents was hell. She blamed me for everything. I complained about the car, the lies. We fought every day. Her parents also started fighting. It was unbearable. And where do you live now? I rent a small room, but it's mine. I work at another factory. I earn less, but I'm calmer. I saw him through different eyes. He was no longer the weak man who had let his wife walk all over me. He was someone who, for the first time in years, was making his own decisions. So, why are you looking for me now? I asked. Tears filled his eyes. Because I need to apologize, Mom. For real. Not just verbal forgiveness, but real forgiveness. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I failed you in the worst way, but his voice broke. I don't want to live the rest of my life without my mother. He reached across the table, shaking. I looked at that hand, my son's hand, the hand I'd held when he was learning to walk, the hand he'd let go of when I needed it most, and after a moment that seemed eternal, I took it. I'm not going to lie to you, George. It still hurts, and it's going to take time for things to be the same as before. I know, but you're my son, and you always will be. He burst into tears, crying of relief, of liberation. We stayed there in that cafe talking for hours. He told me everything. How April had manipulated him from the beginning. How little by little she'd pushed him away from me. How he realized too late everything that happened. He also asked me for something. Can I visit you? Not to live with you, just to see you, to recover what we lost? Yes, I said, but under my rules and on my terms. I'll accept anything, Mom. And so our reconciliation began, slowly, carefully, like those broken pottery pieces you patiently mend, knowing it will never be the same, but that it can be just as valuable. George began to visit me on Sundays. We ate together, talked. Sometimes there were awkward silences. Sometimes he'd say something, and I'd remember the pain and have to take a deep breath, but we were trying, and that was more than I thought I'd have. A year after all the drama, I was sitting on my patio with my coffee, watching the bougainvillea tree Vincent had planted when George was born. The house was at peace. My friends came and went. I danced my social dances. I drove my car wherever I wanted, living off my rent money without asking anyone for anything. George came every week, sometimes bringing me flowers, sometimes just his company. We were healing, slowly, but healing. And April? April had gone back to an aunt in Southern California. I heard that her parents were divorced, that she tried to hook up with another man who had money, but it didn't work out, that she was working in a clothing store, bitter, blaming the world for her problems. Poetic justice had done its work. I thought of Vincent, of how he had planned all this, even from his hospital bed, of how he had left me the tools to defend myself. Thank you, my love, I whispered to the wind. You kept your promise. You looked after me even when you were gone. And there, on that quiet afternoon, I understood something important. That sometimes losing the people you thought you needed is the only way to find yourself. That a mother's love doesn't mean letting yourself be trampled on. That dignity isn't negotiable, not even with your own flesh and blood, and that it's never, ever too late to reclaim your life. Because true wealth isn't in what you possess. It's in what you don't allow to be taken away. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel that you too can reclaim your dignity, leave me your comment. Tell me, have you ever had to set limits with someone you loved? From where are you watching us? Give it a like if Evelyn inspired you, and subscribe to continue sharing life stories like this one, because here, in this space, every voice matters. Every story deserves to be heard, and every woman who has ever felt invisible deserves to be remembered that she is a warrior. See you in the next story. The story you just read is a work of fiction and belongs to the genre of emotional storytelling, aiming to evoke reflection and emotion in the listener. Like this video about why we have to set boundaries with family.